Okay, so in the last video, we introduced the women and we said a good theory that connects all these women together is the theory of sexual sin. So Tamar acted as a prostitute, Rahab acted as a prostitute, Bathsheba committed adultery, so all this works. However, Ruth kind of screws it up for us. Nevertheless, Matthew gives us hints that sexual sin theory is of great merit. And then we said, well, why would Matthew want to include women who are sexually deviant? And I said the reason he wanted to was because of Mary and the early accusations against Christians that Mary committed adultery. And hopefully that got you interested. How on earth could anyone accuse Mary of adultery? Well, in order to see that this in fact did happen, we need to consult the writings of Origen. So Origen wrote a book in 248 AD called Contra Celsus, which means against Celsus. Now Celsus was perhaps the first critic against Christianity, and he wrote a book in 175 called On the True Doctrine. Now we no longer have this work, but we do have Origen who quotes from it. So let's consult Origen and see the critiques that Celsus uses. So this is found in Book 1, Chapter 28 of Contra Celsus, and we read the following. For he, Celsus, represents the Jews disputing with Jesus and confuting him, as he thinks, on many points. And in the first place, he accuses him of having invented his birth from a virgin and upbraids him, Jesus, with being born in a certain Jewish village of a poor woman of the country who gained her subsistence by spinning, and who was turned out of doors by her husband, a carpenter by trade, because she was convicted of adultery. He continues, that after being driven away by her husband and wandering about for a time, she disgracefully gave birth to Jesus, an illegitimate child. So this is the first critique Celsus makes against the Christians. That Mary was not a virgin, no, she committed adultery, and that's how Jesus came about. He makes this even more explicit in Book 1, Chapter 32. Origen writes, but now let us return to where the Jew is introduced, speaking of the mother of Jesus, and saying that, when she was pregnant, she was turned out of the doors by the carpenter to whom she had been betrothed, as having been guilty of adultery, and that she bore a child to a certain soldier named Pantharia. And let us see whether those who have blindly concocted these fables about the adultery of the virgin with Pantharia and her rejection by the carpenter did not invent these stories to overturn his miraculous conception by the Holy Ghost. But so you can see here, Celsus is even being more specific in his criticism. He's saying not only did Mary commit adultery, but she did so with a man named Pantharia. Now the question is, who exactly is Pandaria, and where did they get this name from? So here is a very interesting theory of where they derived this name from. So, a very early critique is that Jesus was known as the son of Pantharia. Jesus was known as the son of Pantharia. Now what's interesting about this word is that it's very similar to the Greek word for virgin, Parthenos. So, the theory goes like this. Christians went around telling people that Jesus was the son of a virgin. Or to put it another way, Jesus was the son of a Parthenos. And non-believers started saying, oh yeah, Jesus is the son of a Parthenos. The son of Parthenos, the Roman soldier. Or in other words, the son of Pantharia, the Roman soldier. So they kind of twisted that word and used it for their own ends. And this point is made by scholars. For instance, we read, according to Joseph Clauser, the term Pantharia is a corruption of Parthenos. This semantic corruption is based on the following historical situation. During the first century, the Jews already were familiar with the Christian creed and the concepts of the virgin birth of Jesus. Hence, in derision, the Jews called Jesus son of Pantharia, meaning son of the panther. Consequently, the son of the virgin, Parthenos, became in mockery the son of the panther. I think that's a pretty good theory. You can't prove it, but I like it. So this is perhaps why we get this word. But as you can see, when we come to this theory of committing adultery, it's also used, let me just say this, it's also used in the Talmud. The Talmud refers to Jesus as the son of Pandaria, which is very similar to the son of Pantharia that Celsus refers to. But the Talmud is not that great as an historical source because it was written so much later. So it's not likely reflective of what was happening in the first century. It could be, but you can't prove it. But all I wanted to do here is just to prove to you that there was an early critique against Christians that Mary committed adultery. So when we come to our first theory that Matthew includes this woman as a defense of Mary, I think it has some real merit to it. In other words, Matthew is showing his audience that this sexual scandal that plagues Mary is common through the genealogy of the greats. Judah can be accused of it. David can be accused of it. So hence, by their inclusion, Matthew is defending Mary. Of course, Ruth screws this up because Ruth did nothing wrong. So we need another theory. What's another theory? The next theory we're going to consider is that all these women were Gentiles. So think about it. Tamar was a Canaanite. Rahab, so that works. Rahab was a Canaanite. She was from Jericho. That works. Bathsheba, well, she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, so she's most likely a Hittite. That works. And Ruth, we are explicitly told, is a Moabite. So that works. So there you go. It works for all of them. Now, just a little bit of a caveat. Tamar and Bathsheba are never explicitly called a Canaanite and a Hittite. I think it's pretty obvious that they were, but it's not explicit in the text. And Hagner makes this point. It is, however, not fully clear that Tamar and the wife of Uriah were Gentiles, although the compiler of the genealogy may well have regarded them as such. So now the question is, well, why would Matthew, a very Jewish gospel, wish to include Gentiles in the genealogy? And I think the reason why he did so is because throughout Matthew's gospel, he's leaving little hints that the message of Jesus will eventually go to the Gentiles. An example of this is when the wise men come to worship Jesus. The wise men are obviously from the east and thus Gentiles, yet they come to worship Jesus. And this is all to give us small hints that one day the message of Jesus will go to the whole world. Of course, this isn't made explicit until we get to the very end of the gospel with the Great Commission, in which Jesus tells his disciples to go out into all the world. Yet, perhaps the reason why Matthew has included these women Gentiles is just to give us a small hint at the very beginning. So there you go. There's our second option. Now, there is a third option, and this option is given by Hagner in his commentary, and it's really just these women are included as they're just generally scandalous. So it's really just a combination of theory 1 and 2. And it's just of these women are generally involved in some sort of scandal. Hagner notes, the third, a most appealing option, utilizes a little from each of the first two options, but centers on the way in which the women prefigure Mary by calling attention to the abundant presence of both surprise and scandal and the Messiah's lineage. The sovereign plan and purpose of God are often worked out in and through the most likely turn of events, and even through women who, through Gentiles or harlots, are receptive to God's will. The virgin birth and the importance of Mary are just such surprising and scandalous, though in Mary's case only seemingly scandalous, ways through which God brings his purposes to realization in the story of Jesus. The women then serve as reminders that God often works in the most unusual ways, and that to be open to his sovereign activity is to be prepared for the surprising. I think this is very good, because it really just combines both of them. I personally prefer the sexual sin more so than the Gentile stuff, just because I think Matthew, by calling her the wife of Uriah and the inclusion of Rahab, to me that's just proof that it has to do with sexual sin. But nevertheless, the general scandal one is good. But what I want you to take away from this, and this is the moral of the whole story, is let's now return to our first question that we posed, which was, why has Matthew included these women? And this is what I want you to take away. Matthew has included these women as a defense of Mary. Mary would have been accused of scandal. This woman committed adultery, she did this, she did that. And hence Matthew is including these women because they're all scandalous. Ruth is a Moabite, and these three are not only Gentiles, but they're also sexually deviant. And hence Matthew wants us to show that nothing unique is happening with Mary. Yes, Mary is accused of adultery, but so are people in Israel's history. Judah did it, David did it, Salmon did it. Everyone did it. Not everyone did it. But it's clear that throughout the history, no one is free of scandal. And hence, we shouldn't expect anything different with Jesus. And hence, these women are included as a defense of Mary. And there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this. I told you in the last video that we're going to start Luke's genealogy, but I just wanted to include this because I think it's just an interesting thing that we should consider. But I promise you in the next video, we'll start Luke's genealogy. So I'll see you then. Goodbye.